Buckle up. This is a long journey with the most satisfying destination you can imagine. Some time ago, I was recruited by a CEO I'd worked with before. A good friend who needed help when his new company was struggling with sales. The company hadn't made a single sale in 2 years. The first year, their software was still in development, not ready for market. The second year, they discovered that having technical staff attempt high-level sales to executives was possibly the worst sales strategy ever conceived. Tech people speak in code and specifications. Buyers want to understand benefits and solutions. I bridged that gap, translating complex technical concepts into natural conversation that helps buyers see exactly how their needs will be met. The job required an hour-and-a-half commute each way from my home, so the CEO agreed I could work remotely, as long as I maintained our sales tracking system, attended important meetings, and provided daily reports to the executive team. The first month, I made that grueling 3-hour daily commute because I needed constant interaction with every department, developing my sales strategy and building trust with the section heads. Once I understood the landscape, I was ready to launch my plan. Meanwhile, the CEO hired a VP of sales. Let's call her the nightmare boss, who started just 4 days before I hit the ground running with potential buyers. She came from banking, with extensive experience in finance products and marketing. I disliked her from the moment she walked through the door. She knew absolutely nothing about technology, and I spent enormous amounts of time trying to educate her. Time I desperately needed for my sales strategy. They brought her on because of her experience attracting financial investors. Nevertheless, I pushed forward. I traveled to a target region and spent 19 days driving from city to city, meeting to meeting. When I returned, I had 17 signed contracts totaling approximately $2 million in sales. My CEO was overjoyed. 6 months later, working from home, I was thriving. Sales were strong, the CEO was happy. Everything was moving in the right direction. The nightmare boss had secured an investor willing to contribute $6 million to the company, and they were coming for a discovery meeting. She asked me to drive up because they specifically wanted to meet the salesperson. Seconds before walking into that crucial meeting, she pulled me aside and said she needed me to support a lie she'd told them. She had essentially doubled my sales numbers. I told her there was absolutely no way I would do that. She claimed the CEO had approved the deception. We reached the point in the presentation where the investor was reviewing my inflated sales figures, then looked directly at me and asked how many sales I was generating monthly. The nightmare boss was behind him, frantically waving her arms, but I refused to participate in her dishonesty and answered truthfully. He stared at the document with the false numbers, while she glared at me with pure hatred. Complete silence filled the room. I asked to see the document, and fortunately, I was able to resolve the situation. I explained that the first 2 numbers had been accidentally transposed, which correlated perfectly with my actual sales versus the inflated figures if you simply switched those digits. The investor was satisfied, and we continued. About a week later, I was meeting with the CIO in his office when he made an inappropriate comment about my body. I'm not easily rattled, but it was so unexpected that it genuinely shocked me. That night, I mentioned it casually to my best friend, who happens to be a lawyer. He suggested I tell the CEO so he could address it before it became a bigger problem. Following proper business protocol, I decided to inform the nightmare boss first, since I reported directly to her and we didn't have an HR department yet. I also reported to the CIO for technical aspects of my role, so the situation was complicated. The next day, the CEO called, and I explained the situation calmly. I emphasized it wasn't a big deal. I just wanted him to speak with the CIO to prevent it from happening again. He said he'd handle it immediately. 2 days later, I checked with him, and he still hadn't addressed it because the investors were in town. I gently encouraged him to resolve it soon, and casually mentioned that my best friend, who happened to be a lawyer, was the one who urged me to report it, because any good CEO would want to know. I made it clear I wasn't upset or angry. The only word he heard was lawyer. He completely lost control, accusing me of bringing legal threats into the situation. This was my good friend, We'd worked together at 2 companies for years. I tried to calm him down, explaining that I hadn't involved any lawyer. I was simply sharing advice from a friend who happened to practice criminal defense law. He seemed to understand, and we ended the call. The next day, I was working normally when I received a call from an attorney, explaining that the company had hired her regarding my sexual harassment claim. I was completely confused. I told her emphatically that I had no claim against the company. She insisted otherwise. That's when everything changed. Dramatically. The CEO was furious with me for creating this problem while investors were evaluating us. His reaction set the tone throughout the company. They began retaliating against me systematically. The nightmare boss made it her personal mission to destroy my life, forgetting to tell me about crucial meetings I was supposed to attend, freezing me out when I was in the office, telling me I could no longer communicate with the CIO, which was problematic since I was selling a multi-million-dollar technical product that required his input and he was technically my other supervisor. Denying a long-planned, pre-approved vacation, basically anything she could devise to make my existence miserable. She implemented with obvious pleasure. During this same period, I developed a serious health condition that ultimately required surgery. My illness didn't impact my work since I could continue working from home, which actually made managing my health easier. The nightmare boss then decided I needed to come to the office every day. Despite the 3-hour round-trip commute, you might wonder why I didn't just leave, find another job. I needed the health insurance. There was no way to secure another position quickly enough, and I had complex surgery scheduled requiring 3 different surgeons. My doctor provided a note releasing me from the daily commute requirement, allowing me to continue working from home. As long as my performance didn't suffer, they legally couldn't force me to commute, especially since working remotely was written into my original employment contract. The night before my surgery, the nightmare boss called to inform me they'd canceled my health insurance. After hanging up, I collapsed on the floor in shock. I was so incredibly ill and mentally exhausted from all the stress. The next morning, the CEO called frantically, wanting to speak with me. My mother refused to let him. I was officially on medical leave as of that morning, and we were heading to the hospital. The CEO had told their lawyer about canceling my insurance, and she had torn him apart, explaining it was completely illegal. They immediately reinstated my coverage. During the 2 weeks I was recovering, my mother found a lawyer for me, because it was clear they were engaged in illegal activities. I still needed to remain employed because I was in no condition to job hunt while healing. It turns out, everything they were doing to me was illegal. Companies cannot retaliate against employees for reporting misconduct. I met with my new lawyer, who said I had an excellent retaliation case and agreed to represent me. He explained I had to continue working there while he built the case, to stay within proper legal protocols while filing the EEOC claim. When it was time to return to work, the company had relocated during my absence, and the nightmare boss refused to tell me the new location, preventing me from returning. Their company lawyer forced them to provide the information, but the nightmare boss gave me incorrect directions, making me late on my first day back. I walked into the new office, and it looked like any other workplace, except for one thing. There was a wide-open area directly in front of the CEO's glass office, with a single desk positioned in the center. Welcome to my new workspace. Also, I wasn't allowed to perform sales duties anymore. In fact, I wasn't allowed to do anything at all. They'd hired new employees, and they treated me like I carried some contagious disease. The nightmare boss had filled their heads with lies, warning them to stay away if they knew what was good for them. Since I had nothing to do but couldn't just sit there looking useless, I worked on documenting everything being done to me, following my lawyer's advice. I was meticulous in recording every detail. The nightmare boss began writing me up for ridiculous infractions, not answering my phone on the first ring, asking questions during company meetings, requesting to see my personnel file, which employees are legally entitled to review, though not to photocopy. Each time she wrote me up, I had to sign the document. There was space for me to respond, so I consistently wrote, I do not agree with this assessment. This infuriated her so much. She wrote me up again for writing that I disagreed with her assessment. There were several instances where she called me into her office and literally began screaming at me, loudly and enthusiastically. I refused to engage. My standard response to everything was, "Okay," which made her absolutely furious. At one point, she was inches from my face, screaming, her face bright red, and I just sat there with a peaceful expression, imagining her having a stroke from her own rage. My calm composure infuriated her beyond measure. Still, I was committed to seeing this through. It didn't matter what new humiliation they created. I absorbed it all with an expressionless face, then returned to my desk and documented everything in my notebook. She despised my notebook, certain I was doing exactly what I was doing, documenting everything. Since it was my personal property, she couldn't confiscate it. I had to carry all my belongings everywhere, to meetings, the bathroom, lunch, because I caught her searching through my desk drawer, even going through my purse, though it gave me great satisfaction to leave a note reading "Forget You" in my backpack, rigged so I could tell if she'd been inside, which she had. I endured everything with courage during work hours, only breaking down after I left each day. My attorney received many tearful phone calls during this period. Finally, the day came when my lawyer had everything he needed, and I could resign. Better still, he advised I didn't need to give 2 weeks' notice. I returned from lunch, typed a single sentence, "I resign immediately," took it to the HR person who had participated in their campaign against me, and handed it to him. His mouth dropped open. He half stood from his chair as he read it. He looked up. I gave him the sweetest smile, said bye-bye just as cheerfully as possible, walked out the door, and drove home feeling absolutely wonderful. 1 month later, my lawyer and I sat in the EEOC office alongside the CEO, nightmare boss, and their lawyer, so the EEOC could review my claim that I in my state. You can't simply file a lawsuit against a company for harassment and retaliation. Claims must first be evaluated by the EEOC, and if they determine you have sufficient grounds, they issue a right to sue document. My lawyer presented my case logically and thoroughly, detailing all the evidence. Took him 40 minutes to go through everything. Then they presented their defense, allegations of poor performance, supported by all the write-ups the nightmare boss had created. The EEOC investigator asked about the timeline, inquiring whether the write-ups occurred before or after my complaint. The nightmare boss, wearing a smug, self-satisfied expression, stated they were all prior to my claim, as evidenced by the dates on each document. The EEOC investigator looked at my lawyer. My lawyer looked at me. I looked at the nightmare boss, then serenely pulled out my photocopies of the documents. While handing them to the investigator, the nightmare boss snapped, "She's not supposed to have those. They're company property." I showed the investigator that the dates had clearly been altered by the nightmare boss. She had made copies with the dates removed, then backdated them, you see. Whenever she wrote me up, I had to personally deliver the document to the CEO for my personnel file. Along the way, I stopped at the copy machine and made my own copies. She never knew I was doing this. You could have heard a pin drop. The EEOC investigator reviewed the copies, then slowly placed them on the table. She remained silent for a long moment, then spoke. I can remember her exact words to this day. "I've witnessed extensive mistreatment and illegal conduct by both employees and employers, including forged and altered documents. But I have never encountered someone so incredibly foolish as to present documents this easily disproven. Not only are employees entitled to receive and retain copies of formal write-ups, but reading these ridiculous allegations, it's obvious you're attempting to manufacture your case." She continued, explaining that I had a clear foundation for a lawsuit, and moreover, I would win it. She recommended they adjourn to another room and determine a settlement amount to pay me immediately, or risk the lawsuit. They went to a nearby office, and I could hear their lawyer tearing them apart. Words I caught included "lied to me," "lied to EEOC," presenting false documents, broke so many laws. Figure out a number large enough to satisfy her so this doesn't go to court. Because you will lose. They returned with a $50,000 offer, which we accepted. My lawyer and I left, then performed a touchdown celebration dance in the parking lot. Looking up at the EEOC window, I could see the nightmare boss looking absolutely miserable, crying. She had just been fired. That was my first year of revenge. I'm not typically a vindictive person. I get angry, then I move on. But for the nightmare boss, I nurtured that hatred and vowed to eventually get revenge. So I kept tabs on her and discovered she'd opened a finance marketing company after being fired. Then I waited a year before implementing my beautiful plan. For the past 18 years, I've executed a wonderful, soul-refreshing project. Each year, I visit her website and collect all the work email addresses and phone numbers for her employees. Then I subscribe them all to request more information from places like online schools, insurance companies. All those aggressive organizations that keep your contact information longer than imaginable while trying to sell you everything under the sun. The last few years, I've subscribed them to an email bombing service, where the service takes the address and instantly subscribes it to thousands of newsletters, information requests, and other online marketing databases. I tested it with a temporary email, and it absolutely destroys your inbox with thousands of emails received within seconds. And they never, ever stop. You literally have to abandon the email address because it becomes completely unusable. Each year when I collect the contact information, all the emails have been changed to new ones. Last year, my cousin took a job in the same building. I enlisted her help, and she befriended a receptionist working for the nightmare boss. After executing my annual plan, my cousin took her to lunch. The receptionist was in a terrible mood, explaining that the entire organization was in chaos because IT had to recreate all the email addresses again. It keeps happening repeatedly, and nobody can figure out why. She said the owner, the nightmare boss, has had to replace her cell phone number 3 times because of all the texts and calls she receives whenever it happens again. Sometimes the nightmare boss would list her phone number on the website, which I would subscribe to everything imaginable. The best part for me was learning that she lost a major client because they felt the company was in too much constant turmoil. The thought of this keeps me warm and peaceful at night, and I sleep so very, very well. Subscribe and share to support our channel.